They have demonstrated across our district and other places that if you provide for them the environment for them to thrive, they can do the unimaginable. Now we have 4 priorities that we are focused on. Columbus City Schools will be whole child focused. And what that means is that we will focus not only just the academic, but also social and emotional well-being of our students. Equitable opportunities for all students in Columbus City Schools means that every student, regardless of your background, will have an opportunity to be successful. Strong learning communities in every region means regardless of where our students go, we have to make sure that our students are learning in 21st century facilities. Authentic engagement is so important. Why? Because we want to make sure that everyone has a voice and that we're intentional of making sure that we are including all stakeholders. In order for these 4 priorities to be realized, it is important that we have a foundational system of support. So there is a role for every one of our employees to play to ensure that we have 21st century classrooms, our students are leading the way, and that portrait of a graduate is realized.
The past 2 years have been incredibly challenging, but we know that as one community, working towards one goal, that we are up to the task at hand. Every journey begins with one step, and our journey begins today.
So we're in this together. Be committed to the next steps with us. We're going to be committed, we're going to be transparent, but together we can be transformational.
You are far smarter than I was when I was your age, and you will be far smarter than any of us ever will be. And this is because your generation is so innovative, so creative, and you understand your role and your civic duty in making our society better.
Senior to sophomore will definitely benefit you in the future, and I am so happy that you guys chose to take your senior year to packing on with so many college courses. I know it was hard, and you're probably so glad that it's over, but I promise you it was worth it. I was a part of Ohio State's academy, and whenever I had an issue, Miss Raspberry was my first person that I went to.
You know, she is really an amazing person, and she is very passionate about what she does. I couldn't ask for a better support system in this program, and I'm just very thankful for the program and thankful for you too. Thank you.
But most importantly, I now understand that taking a course shouldn't just be about making the A's, but actually learning to love like whatever course you're taking, because that will really pull you through even in the times you don't want to study. You're like, I really like this class, so I'm just going to do it anyways.
I actually found myself becoming really complacent in high school classes. It was really easy. There was no studying. It was just do the work and you get an A. So I'm really grateful for this program to allow me to challenge myself and kind of gain back my drive that I had lost and get me to who I am today.
Exposure changes expectations, but experiences changes lives. We always have to make sure that we give our students more and more experiences, taking them onto college campuses. They can do it. Just listen, we have students that are going to be the next scientists, the doctors, the lawyers. You are the next generation that's going to make America great and greater. It's because of you and your foundations that you have here in Columbus City Schools and at the post-secondary schools that you've attended.
Good evening, everyone. I am calling our September 20th regular board business meeting to order. We have Mr. Roush here filling in. Will you please call the roll?
President Adair.
Present.
Ms. Beckerly.
Present.
Mr. Brown.
Here.
Mr. Cole.
Excused.
Dr. Pierce. Vice President Reyes. Ms. Vera. You have a quorum, Madam President?
Thank you. Will you all please stand and join me in the pledge?
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening. Before we begin, I want to highlight the fact that we here at the Columbus City School District, we are a safe place, safe space for all of our students. And right now, we know that our state school board is considering progressing and moving forward on some resolutions that we believe could really harm our students in our community. The Columbus School Board and District has always been advocates for our students, no matter who you are, who you love, where you come from, everything about you, we really value and appreciate. And so we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about the resolution and what the steps this board will take further in the agenda. But I wanted to highlight that all of us here today want to show, and we're all wearing our shirts, want to show our community that we here in the district are a safe space for everyone. So I want to thank my fellow board members and staff who are demonstrating this by wearing our shirts today in support of our LGBTQ community and all of our students and the diversity that makes them uniquely them. So on our agenda this evening, we will appoint our president. Oh, no, we're going to do that first. I'm sorry. So we also, because Treasurer Bohoric is gone today, we need to appoint a treasurer pro tempore, and that tonight is going to be board member Brown.
Need a motion in a second.
Who has the motion? Nobody? Okay. I will make the motion for board member Brown to be our president pro tempore for this evening's meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
Please call the roll.
President Adair.
Yes.
Ms. Beckerly.
Yes.
Mr. Brown.
Yes.
Ms. Vera.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you so much. On tonight's agenda, we do not have any public comment on agenda items. We will be doing a monitoring report with our superintendent. We're expecting an executive report from our internal audit team. No report from our treasurer's office. We have one item on our board matters, which is to discuss the State Board of Education's resolution. We have items on our consent agenda. Get to the end. We do not have any comment on non-agenda items, and we will go into executive session at the end of the meeting, come back for public dismissal and adjournment. Is there a motion to approve our agenda?
I move we approve the agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
Are there any additions or changes to our agenda? Hearing none, without objection, our agenda has been approved. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our superintendent. Hello, Madam Superintendent.
Hello, everyone. So thank you, President Adair, and good evening, everyone. So earlier this month, our Chief Performance Officer, Dr. Russell Brown, provided a detailed update on our academic performance data, the state report card changes, and alignment between our outcomes and the board goals. So tonight's monitoring report will focus on Board Goal 1, strengthening reading proficiency. So I'll ask my colleagues to come up. That would be Dr. Russell Brown, Dr. Todd Walker, and Dr. Angela Chapman. And we're going to have a collaborative discussion on ways in which we were successful in working toward increasing our reading proficiency. So I will turn it over at this time to Dr. Brown, and then we will, after his presentation, we'll dive into some discussion around how well we did. All right, Dr. Brown.
Good evening, President Adair, members of the board, Superintendent Dixon, and the members of the community. Pleased to have the opportunity to speak with you again this evening. Today we're going to have our first opportunity to talk about a board goal. To date we've spoken about interim measures, but not really a board goal. And this is our first board goal, strengthening reading proficiency. Today, I want to go over a couple things. I want to talk about how our students perform relative to the board goal, how our students' gains compared to those of the state, as well as then looking at the strategies that work this year that we wish to consolidate and deepen as we move forward, and those things that we're going to do to foster continuous improvement and produce additional gains as we move forward. So again, this is our first board goal, and I just want to reiterate it for everyone. Again, the objective here is to strengthen reading proficiency, and the goal is to increase the percentage of third grade students proficient in reading on the Ohio State test, the OST. It will increase from 43%, which was observed in 18-19, or in this case, a decline in the benchmark because we dropped all the way down to 23% during the pandemic, to a total of 55% by June of 2026. So it's a fairly steep trajectory, a fairly steep expectation of change. And just for context, you know, the state on this at this point in time has about 60% of students meeting this goal currently. And prior to the pandemic, only about 2 out of 3 students were meeting this goal prior to the pandemic. So we had really substantial gains this year in terms of the percent of students who met the target proficiency rate. We had an increase of 10.5 percentage points from what was observed last year, so we went from 23% to 33.5% proficiency this year. It's a double-digit gain in proficiency rate, and that in my career I can count the number of times I've seen that on one hand. We really saw some very substantial gains in proficiency, and I think that that's a testament to the hard work of our teachers, our principals, and everyone at the school that contributes to our students' well-being and their academic outcomes. This is a larger improvement than was observed across the state as a whole. The state as a whole only had 7.9 percentage points of gain. So we actually exceeded the rate of gain within the system with respect to the state. Our students did this through exceptional growth. We've talked about this before. Our growth helped us exceed our proficiency target for this year. And the reason we were able to exceed the target and the projected target for this year was, again, the exceptional growth that was observed by our students during the third grade year. So while this goal, the goal of 29.4% is a target for the system as a whole, I'm pleased to say that nearly every student group has exceeded that target as well. So again, the target was set for the system as a whole, and I think that it was wise for the board to set the target, given that, again, roughly 2 out of 3 students aren't meeting this target at this point in time. So setting an overall target for the system made sense and also aligns to the board guardrails and the work that's being done around the board guardrails as well. Again, not only did the majority of student groups exceed this target, they also exceeded the improvement that was observed at that 7.9 percentage point gain observed at the state. Our students, almost every student group exceeded that as well. I want to spend a little time talking about the groups that didn't hit the target this year, because I think that this doesn't tell the whole story. So our African American students hit 91% of their target. They were very close. We had a 26.9 percentage point proficiency rate this year, but they actually had a larger gain in proficiency than the other student groups and the system as a whole. So the system as a whole had a 10.5 percentage point gain in proficiency, but our African American students actually had an 11.4 percentage point gain in proficiency. And again, when we think about carrying these goals out over time, if that student group continues to make that gain, over time, those proficiency gaps close as we move towards that 55% target for 25-26. And again, this also exceeds the proficiency rate that was gained that was observed for the state as a whole. Not only did African American students in this system outperform the system as a whole, they also outperformed the state as a whole. Our homeless students had a 6.8 percentage point gain in proficiency. And they approached the rate of gain that was observed across the state. So they saw a 6.8% change, the state saw 7.9, fairly close to what the state saw as a whole. They exceeded the rate of gain that was observed for homeless students across the state as a whole. So homeless students in Columbus City Schools actually showed a greater gain in proficiency than homeless students across the state as a whole. While we didn't hit the target, we're moving in the right direction. Finally, the last group was special ed. Special ed students across the state struggled this year. They had the lowest amount of gain of any student group across the state. Our students actually had a relatively stable score. They lost about 1.8 percentage points. But if we think about it, and this is part of the national dialogue, if you look at NAEP and the national dialogue around NAEP, we saw across the country when the fourth grade scores came out, students who were furthest away from proficiency were the most likely to be hurt by remote instruction and the impact of this. And we're talking about students who had nearly 2 years of their instruction done remotely, and these are students who, frankly, need high-touch support services that are really hard to deliver in Zoom. And it's not to say that our teachers didn't try. It's not to say that it's just not the ideal way to provide early childhood education, and particularly early childhood education for students with disabilities. And again, population that's most likely to be impacted by that. So this process that we've talked about is always anchored in just an overall continuous improvement process. We've talked about this off and on throughout the year. And there are some things that clearly worked very well. We met our goal. The majority of our student groups exceeded their goal. We saw double-digit improvements for most groups and really saw substantial gains when you think about those comparisons to the state as a whole. We actually exceeded, again, the gains for the state as a whole. So there are some wins here that I think we should be celebrating. And again, I think we should acknowledge the hard work of our schools and our students in this process and the parents who leaned in to help with this as well. Just want to be very thankful to all of those folks. Again, last year was our first in-person opportunity for our teachers to use our new common curriculum. That was the first in-person opportunity for that. It's our Tier 1 instruction. It aligns to our MTSS model, and we saw some again, gains associated with that, and we need to deepen that process. Our whole school improvement process is aligned to helping folks think about improving first instruction, so we'll be leaning into that. We saw, again, significant improvements in proficiency and growth, and we want to continue to improve that Tier 1 instruction. We want every student in the system to have an opportunity to have access to high-quality first instruction. In terms of continuous improvement, we've got a guardrail that's around this idea of MTSS and beginning to implement MTSS. And this year, the objective is to have about 10% of our schools implementing that Tier 2 model. So we're just leaning into Tier 2 for MTSS. So special education, again, as planned in this guardrail work, is implementing system-wide training on MTSS this year, which is a natural and logical way to move forward with this. And again, really looking at Tier 2 and Tier 3 opportunities for our special ed students. And again, this includes both time for extended learning opportunities and standardized supports for students as they move through that process. Again, the idea is to begin to work in this Tier 2 model and Tier 3 model to provide students with supports as we move forward. Again, just wanted to provide a little contextualization before we start our dialogue, but I think we're around now to questions and discussion.
Okay, so before we begin questions and discussion, let's do our before monitoring exercise to ensure that the report was able to be monitored tonight. So, board members, you have the report in your packet. You also, just for your own knowledge, have the board questions and responses. They are, I think, in maybe the pocket of your binders. And then don't forget, we have our handy dandy little cheat sheets for our monitoring, so you can take all that stuff out. So the first question is, does the monitoring report clearly show what is being monitored, which specific policy, end, goal, interpretation, etc.? I just need kind of a yes, no, thumbs up. Yes, okay. Does it clearly show data for the 3 previous reporting periods, preferably on a line graph? Does it clearly show the current reporting period? And does it clearly show the target reporting period's annual targets and deadline target? Seeing head nods and thumbs up. Does it clearly show the superintendent's evaluation of the performance? Yes. Does it clearly show supporting documentation that evidences the superintendent's evaluation? If the district is not at target or the superintendent's evaluation indicates implementation is not on track, does the monitoring report clearly describe any needed next steps, which we are exceeding our goals, so there is that second part doesn't apply to this one. But does it show supporting documentation? Seeing head nods. Okay, so Board Member Beckerly, is this one we would then approve or accept it, or would it be after the monitoring? After monitoring. Okay. All right. So we are going to go ahead and move into our question portion. Remember, board members, we are going to spend, the goal is to spend 2/3 of our time on the who, what, why questions of the past, and then 1/3 of our time on the how questions. And so I'm going to go ahead and open the floor to anyone that has questions on who, what, or why we got the results we did in 3rd grade reading. Who'd like to start?
Can I ask a question of clarification?
Of me?
Yes.
Yes.
In the process, probably Board Member Beckerly or Vera can help as well. As we do these monitoring reports, I thought I understood AJ to say if we did not have a certain allotment of who, what, why questions, we could move to the strategy questions and spend more time there.
We can. I just want to make sure that there's no questions.
Okay.
So.
Excellent.
So I'll ask you a question then on the past. You have one too? Okay. So you mentioned in the report that, we have these results because of the hard work of teachers and community and parents, which is true. Do we know, though, anything a little bit deeper about what it was that, especially for our African American students who you show, had really the biggest growth? If there was a particular strategy or strategies that we know about for that group or others that worked.
So I'll speak to part of it, and then others may wish to fill in as well. The one thing that was, I think, very consistent throughout last year was messaging. We messaged the importance of growth, that no matter where students started, it was important for students to grow. And we started messaging the importance of using the tools that are available to us to monitor students' growth over time. We revisited growth as a part of the conversation at the board table. And I think that attention to growth sends a message to the system about the importance of attending to the needs of every student, where they are, and beginning to move them forward. I would also add that again, and we mentioned this, the implementation of a common curriculum across the system that's aligned to grade level, incredibly important, because again, it sets the level, it sets that first instruction that we expect for all our students across the system. So I think those two things in and of themselves really point, again, are promising and point to the direction that I think you're speaking to.
Board Member Beckerly?
I guess it's a why question, and that do we know or do we have a plan to kind of survey the teachers to see what they think worked? And, you know, I'd just be curious to know their feedback because it's their first year with the new program as well.
So are you asking, sorry, are you asking about did we in the past or as a future strategy in the future?
Okay, did we, for now, past? Do we have any sense of how the teachers received the new curriculum? Was there a groundswell or, you know?
I did not put a survey in place to address this. It's always a balancing act in terms of time and demand. We use the Panorama survey currently, and that has a fairly heavy footprint in terms of time.
So how many surveys?
Right. So I always am a little worried about survey fatigue, to be honest.
We also have an opportunity through the school improvement process to gather feedback from teachers at each specific site. So teachers serve on their TBTs and their BLT, which drives the school improvement process at each school, which again is aligned to the board goals. And each school has an opportunity to choose those high impact, high leverage strategies after reviewing their data that they want to focus on to support you know, this K through 3 reading goal. And so there's lots of opportunities at the building level to get feedback on what's working, what's not, as a part of that continuous improvement process. The curriculum, you know, what do we need to refine? What do we need to improve on? Is it more PD that we need? Do we need more time? Do we need more resources? And so there are lots of opportunities at the site level to provide feedback as a part of that continuous improvement cycle.
So it sounds like you've got procedures in place that allow you to capture at the building level what's working, what's not working, and to lean into the things that the teachers are excited about. Okay, that's pretty cool.
Absolutely.
Member Brown.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, what we've asked about so far is strategy and what works and what does not. But the question that I have, you know, and we've broken these down by ethnic group or race, is there anything within each of those groups that tells us what factors the student brings to the classroom that allows them to benefit or not to benefit versus others in that group?
I would say that certainly attendance is a is a big concern. We certainly want our students to be in school so that they can have access to this guaranteed and viable curriculum that we have ready for them. And I would also say that, you know, we certainly want to make sure that we are providing lots of opportunities for our students to start with us in pre-K. So, you know, this is an early literacy goal, and we're looking at third grade achievement, but it does not begin in third grade, right? And so the more access that we have to our students so that we can make sure that they have those basic foundational skills helps to prepare them to be better prepared for the OST when they take that in third grade.
That makes sense. Have you looked, and I know this wasn't part of the plan necessarily, but have you looked at these students to see whether they did or did not attend pre-K and whether that factor makes a difference?
We have not, but that would be a good project for someone on our data team.
Thank you.
We did look at attendance, though.
So in the 2018-19 third graders, they were out of 43%, which is the highest in the that we were looking at in this set of data. What was different about that cohort of third graders? You know, understanding, you know, that the pandemic and all of that, but, you know, that is for us pretty high, I think. And so was there something that cohort experienced that was maybe different for that time? And I know that you weren't here, so that might be hard, but what accounted for that high number, the 43 on the chart?
So the one thing that stands out to me that's very different about this cohort versus 18-19 is, that cohort had in-person instruction from kindergarten all the way through. I think that's a very significant impact when you start thinking about the pandemic and, again, the impact of the pandemic on particularly early childhood instruction. I think, sometimes when we look at secondary settings, sometimes remote can work. There are students for whom that works just fine. I'm yet to talk with anybody that thinks it's a good idea for early childhood. And pretty much anybody that has a young child wasn't real happy with that. So these kids had a significant disruption during that process. And again, what we see with our data mirrors that of the country. And if anything, I think we saw a bigger bump than most on this. I think it's a good news story. We've turned a corner and coming back away from and beginning to recover proficiency rates from the pandemic. And we cut the gaps for most of these by near half. So again, I think it's a celebration for the system on this. And as we move forward and we have consistent in-person instruction, I would be hopeful that we will continue to see these gains. Though we do have a couple cohorts of students coming through that will still be adversely impacted, early childhood cohorts that are adversely impacted by the pandemic.
Member Vera.
Thank you, President Adair. So do we know if have we looked at this data from a region breakdown? Like, I guess I want to understand, are we noticing, a trend in a specific region that has more significant decline or needing additional support? Like, who exactly, I see like the big numbers here, but who, is there a region or is there a specific portion of our district that really needs additional services? Is that okay?
Well, part of that would be future, right? But maybe is there something causing?
I guess I'm trying to understand, like, I see the big overall numbers, but like, I also feel like I still don't know who these students are. Like, is this region 1? You know what I mean? Like, that's, I guess, what I'm trying to get to the point. Like, I'm trying to figure out who are kids in this data that actually need this level of additional support.
So there are two pieces that I think I would lean into. One, the board goal is set for the overall population.
Right.
And so we're tracking that.
Yeah.
The last time I was here, we talked a little bit about regions. If our students consistently attended their home school, in the catchment area for their home school, I think there's a great deal of value for regional analysis because then it tells me about equity of opportunity and equity of outcome for kids based on their neighborhood. 45% of our kids go to schools outside their neighborhood. And so it really clouds that picture for me. It makes it hard to so the regions to me are, and actually Dr. Chapman would probably be much more articulate about this, that's a management structure put in place to help get somebody closer to the school so that they have a relationship with the school and help provide individualized support to the school. If we're going to come at this from an equity lens, I think we have to think very deeply about that.
No, and I understand that, but respectfully, I think if we talk about equity, we're not talking necessarily from this context about the neighborhood. I want to understand what buildings and what region are we finding that we need additional support, additional staff. So I'm not looking from the lens of the economic neighborhood situation. I want to understand, is there a red flag of regions or buildings that need additional support? So I guess when I think about regions, I'm not necessarily thinking about, even though those factors are important, but that's not what I'm getting to when I'm asking that question.
think it goes along with Board Member Brown's idea at the beginning. Who are these students and what are the additional, you know, pieces of them that are maybe are making this change? And so maybe it is, or having data about, or maybe did you, let me ask a question. Do we consider looking at it based on like school performance, kind of figuring out, are there hot spots where different resources need to go? Is that at all part of this analysis currently?
That's really more anchored to the school improvement process.
Okay.
Where we, again, leverage that management structure as a way to lean in and do individualized plans by building to try to meet the needs of students. And again, Dr. Chapman could probably speak to that much more articulately than me.
So our state, as you know, issues the district report card. They also issue a school report card. And so each school is rated on those individual indicators that the state has. As a part of that process, every school is required to write a school improvement plan. This is my current data. They analyze their data, they determine where the gaps are, where the strengths, where the areas of opportunity are, and the school with the building leadership team, principal and building leadership team, they write a school-specific school improvement plan. This year, all of the schools' improvement plans were aligned to our board goals, right? So every elementary school in our district has a goal to support early literacy. So that's not a surprise to anyone in our organization. All of their strategies are aligned to support that goal. Every school's improvement plan will be customized and will look very different because their data is different. So it's at the school level where we're having those very differentiated conversations about what does our school need to meet these goals. Perhaps it's more professional development. Perhaps it's looking at the amount of time, the interventions that we have in place. Perhaps it's adding additional supports. Perhaps it's collaborating with the department. But we support the schools in their process of looking at analyzing their data and developing school improvement goals as well as strategies to support those goals. And then in monitoring that process, the area superintendents are working with the school principals to monitor their school improvement plans, their strategies, to ensure that they have the resources that they need to stand up those plans that they've laid out. We also have support from our state support team that comes in and provides feedback to our schools. They select different school improvement plans randomly and provide feedback on the feedback that we're providing to our schools. And then also soon, I believe in September, or in maybe another month, at the end of the month, we'll be receiving school improvement statuses for all of our schools from the state. So they'll say these are the schools ranked in order of priority status that should be receiving additional support. So that ranking has been on hold for the last 2 years due to the pandemic. But absolutely, that's another way that we are able to triage the support that we are providing to our schools. Very clear and transparent process. These schools need more, these schools need less in one particular area. And there's a monitoring process attached to that to ensure not only is that clear at the building level, but also at the district level in terms of the supports that need to be in place to support our schools. So I'm sure there'll be more to come on that later once we have that information.
Additional questions on the past, why we are where we are with this data? Board Member Beckerly.
So we haven't seen that for the past year because they haven't done it. That improvement, the school improvement thing.
The school improvement plans, schools always, every year they have a school improvement plan, irregardless of, the years that we did not have the state assessments.
Okay.
So what we hadn't seen from the state was the rankings of the schools. That's what they had put on pause during the pandemic because we didn't have the state assessments. So that was the piece that was on hold, but every school writes a school improvement plan each year.
Okay. I guess my other one is forward-looking. But can I just say one thing? Like, at some point, we need to stop and say, this is really exciting, and we are very excited and thrilled and grateful. This is something that every person in the process, from the teachers to the instructional assistants to the principals to reading specialists to coaches, everyone needs to stop and take a bow. I mean, this is, something to be celebrated, and we need to figure out a way to market. I don't know what we do exactly, but let's take that as an action item, some way to acknowledge this success. I'm teasing about lapel pins, but something.
Well, don't talk about lapel pins. I'm working on lapel pins.
Oh,
But
okay,
anyway,
sorry.
Good comments, Board Member Beckerly, but I want to remind you that isn't part of the monitoring.
All
and
right.
So we can talk about that at the conclusion of the session and give kudos to all that were involved.
Deal.
Okay. All right. Are we ready to go forward? All right. Dr. Pierce, do you want to start?
Thank you, President Adair. Appreciate it. So I want to take us back to a couple of meetings ago, Dr. Brown, where you indicated that we have the opportunity to see a lot of growth with our students who are in special education and emergent bilingual students. My question is, how are we working to ensure that additional instructional assistants are hired to assist these populations, especially given that our students receiving special education are 9.7%, well below our targeted rate?
So I guess 2 points. One, again, the emphasis is the importance of growth. That for students, and particularly students who are well below proficiency, two or more years below, the only way we're going to get them to proficiency is to focus on growth with them. This is the one student population where we didn't see that this year, and so we definitely need to lean into that. The hiring practice piece around that, I can't speak to right now, so.
So definitely understand that growth piece, but I want to challenge us to continue to tackle this problem around hiring additional support staff to help our students be successful.
Great. Mike, can you hear us?
Hey, hold on, though.
Oh.
That's true what she's saying, but we don't need the extra commentary on it.
Yes, I just wanted to fill the dead time.
Did you have
Hi
what
there.
was your, can you remind us of your question?
The question is, how are we working to hire additional instructional assistants to help our students that are in special education who have 9.7% met the goal? The additional, the additional larger percentage of 89 plus did not meet the goal. So that's a forward thinking. How are we assisting?
The question has a lot of assumptions that is the strategy, because the questions are supposed to be a strategy, and I'm not sure we've heard from the administration that part of this strategy to improve special education is to hire. Makes total sense, probably is, but we need somebody to say that to us. It is not in our paper.
I don't see any clear strategy in our paper. So, it is a forward forecasting question.
So maybe what are the strategies? So someone can say this.
Well, 2 meetings ago, they said IAs were the strategy. Yes, and Mr. DeFabo stood up here and
Oh,
talked
you said
about,
2 meetings ago.
Yes. I'm very clear on what was stated.
Well, it wasn't stated in this monitoring report. So if someone wants to state it from administration that is in fact a strategy.
Is that no longer a strategy?
Maybe you could tell us what the strategy is. We know the MTTS, that was kind of highlighted in this report, but what is the strategy then? Can we go, is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so MTSS is part of the strategy, and so that is ensuring that each student is receiving that guaranteed and viable curriculum, that first instruction. But more to Dr. Pierce's question, we also are looking at increasing co-teaching opportunities for our special education students. And so specifically at 28 elementary building sites, we're expanding those co-teaching opportunities. So that's increasing time with special education students, that they're authentically being educated in general education settings. That speaks to that Tier 1 instruction around making sure that they have quality on-grade level first instruction, and then moving into the intervention, which is Tier 2, making sure that where there are gaps or where students may not be attaining the curriculum or demonstrating achievement, that we're then intervening.
My second question, and you could probably keep your line of logic going then, is how are we using our regional management structure to enact strategies to improve scores for our student populations below our targeted range?
Let's see. There are lots of strategies. So first I'll start with the continuous improvement cycle or school improvement cycle. So as I mentioned before, we are well positioned this year to ensure alignment across all of our schools, regions, aligned to the board goals. If you remember last year when we started with the board goals, those were finalized in the fall, maybe September, October. It was after November, okay.
Yeah.
It was after the school year started. So Dr. Pierce, the schools had already started their school improvement plan or developed their school improvement plan. With that process actually starts in the spring and summer. And so they had already written their school improvement plans last year, so they did not have the opportunity to align their school goals to the board goals. So as I mentioned earlier, everyone is aware in our district that we have an early literacy goal. Why? Because we were able to get in front of that process. The board goals were finalized. And so starting with the board goals, we developed our district-wide improvement plan aligned to those board goals. And we picked out those key priority areas that we wanted to ensure that every school in our district was focused and developed strategies around those key areas. So early literacy is one. Without that alignment, schools could have perhaps chosen a different goal and been focused on a totally different strategy. So we wanted to ensure that that alignment was in place for all of our schools, so there'd be alignment to the board goals and our school improvement process. And so within every region, the area superintendents are responsible for providing the schools with feedback on their school improvement plans as they're developing their school improvement plans, as they are monitoring their school improvement plans, and making sure that they have the supports and resources available. We work hand in hand with other departments, so like our Academic Services Department, Department of Equity, to ensure that those supports are aligned. So that's just a little bit about the school improvement process. In addition to that, we also, in collaboration with the other departments, we have asked that they align the resources from their team to support the regional model. So for example, I'll take Dr. Brown's department as an example. Instead of schools reaching out to different people, we have 113 schools, instead of each school reaching out to different departments or different folks in Dr. Brown's department, each region has what we call a leadership intern that's focused on data. And so they have an opportunity to build relationships with that region and provide support as it relates to data for that specific region. So that regional expert, I like to call them, has an opportunity to learn the data within the region, learn the needs, and provide support in that area. Similarly, similar structures are in place for almost all of our departments across the district to provide supports from the central office. It's really providing more customized supports to the regions. In addition to that, we are also aligned, as I mentioned, how we had the opportunity to align our school improvement goals to the board goals. We have also worked collaboratively across multiple departments to ensure that our PD days and our PD time is aligned. And so all of the professional development time for our teachers as well as for our principals is focused on those key priorities that we are focusing on. So MTSS, all of the regions, we have brought all of the principals together for those region meetings, and all of them are being provided with support on how they lead and lift up the MTSS work across the district. The instructional coaching model, again, a new strategy that we are implementing this year to ensure that all of our schools have an instructional coach. So they are provided with job embedded, on the job PD to support an alignment to these board goals. So those are a few of the strategies that we are implementing, but what I want you to hear loud and clear is that there's alignment to the board goals, what we're saying at this table, what matters most, alignment to our PD, how we spend our time, how we spend our resources, and the goals that the schools are setting for their school improvement plans.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Chapman, for that and explaining that and sharing that with us. Much appreciated. The next questions that I have it's a two-part question, and I'm going to take you back to about 3 meetings ago, where we discussed that transportation is an issue. I recall you specifically saying we are losing instructional time that we cannot get back. So here's my two-part question. How do you foresee our transportation challenges impacting our students and our schools' ability to achieve our target goals, and how are we working to lessen that impact?
So,
Sorry. Need help.
So the
embedded
unresolved
assumption.
issue, the unresolved
it's-
issue is transportation, which we've pointed out in multiple sessions.
But not in this one. So I hear you. You're absolutely right, Dr. Pierce. But what we are monitoring is what they have brought forward right now. And so transportation has not been part of this. Now, you're right that these things are very logical, but you are making assumptions instead of us, basically, for a better word, grading the administration on the assumptions and strategies they've brought forward.
So can I just clarify? The assumption is not being made. I am basing the question on facts that have been given in prior meetings, and
No,
they should
hear
be
that.
able to
Totally
chew gum
hear
and
that,
walk at the
except
same
that
time
those
and carry
facts
those
have-
strategies through
Dr.
monitoring
Pierce,
reports.
that's totally I agree with you what you're saying, but the problem is that has not been made part of this presentation to us.
Yeah, maybe assumption's not the right word. There's a premise in your question, and we're supposed to ask open-ended questions. What is how?
I just want I appreciate that we're staying true to the student outcome focused governance. We know we have an issue in our district.
Right. So just ask the question differently without
There's
the
no need-
assumptions.
There's
That's
no,
all.
it's not an assumption. They
It's an
have
assumption
shared
to
it. They have
this
shared
report.
it in multiple.
Totally hear you.
I mean, the
I hear
question
you.
could
I
be,
agree
we
that
could go
these are-
all the
and
way
we know
back to
these
why
things.
President Adair to say, why wasn't transportation even brought to bear into this report?
Was
and the impact?
transportation part of the consideration of this report? That's the question, Dr. Pierce. I mean, you just have to ask the question in the right framework of rules that we have agreed to as part of this process. Okay?
The rules are impacting the success of our children.
No, they're not. No, the rules are how we govern this process and participate in the monitoring. So if you're identifying a deficiency in the report because you believe transportation should be a strategy, that's a different conversation.
I'm simply identifying the obvious. We've sat here and we said that transportation is impacting instructional time. We have a report here that's talking about academic gains and achievements, but we're not willing to deal with that unresolved issue?
I don't think that's a fair assessment at all. What I'm saying is this is the opportunity for the administration to bring us a report about the goal, and they are telling us what strategies and what information is here. That transportation is not part of it. Now, you can ask them the question.
So the question's been asked in multiple ways. Was transportation taken into consideration when you thought about this?
And that was a past question, which you did not want to participate in. But if we can go ahead and
Because it's logically moving
I hear
forward,
you,
how is
Dr. Pierce,
transportation
but
going to
these
impact?
are the framework. This is the agreed framework of which we are doing this process.
And again, I
we can
restate
spend
that
some
our
time thinking about
framework
that during our
is
retreat.
sacrificing the success of our students.
I disagree with that.
So we agree to disagree.
How are we going?
Outside that monitoring framework for a moment and just get
No.
an answer to the question?
Not the second. We can, look, my job right now is to ensure the monitoring session goes like a monitoring session. We can debrief about it. We can even talk about, do we want to change the rules later? But right now, I'm timing us, because that's what I'm supposed to be doing, and ensuring that we are asking the questions in the agreed upon format. Okay, that's my job right now. I don't disagree with anything you're saying on content or strategy or why isn't it here. But we just need to ask the questions in the right way. Please, that is what we have agreed to do. So her question is, and I will allow it, going back to the past, even though that wasn't, we're past that, was transportation and the issues of transportation considered in this data?
I did not consider transportation as part of this. Again, we looked at the outcomes connected to the board goal. We do know that attendance is connected to student performance, and there's a logical thread there, but it was not part of the analysis here. So I can't answer with any assurity about how transportation impacted this performance for this group of students on this.
That's the answer. Are there any more future questions?
I have a couple.
Board Member Vera.
Thank you, President Adair. Let's see here. So I guess this is, since it has been mentioned about personnel, how are we going to recruit the teaching staff that we actually need for what has been identified here?
I think
Mike,
you're
you're
on
on
mute,
mute.
Mr. DeFabo.
I'm not on mute.
Okay, now we can hear you. We just couldn't hear you. Go
Oh,
ahead.
good. Sorry. Board Member Vera, it's a really great question. I think that we have to look at how we recruit differently. When I got here 3 years ago, most of our teacher recruitment, well, I know all of our teacher recruitment was focused on part-time employees who were retired administrators. They've done a successful job for a very long time, and for many years, not a lot of recruitment was required other than a quick handshake. That isn't the case anymore, and we are now competing with everyone, especially when it comes to special education. And so we have to look at this differently. So we have some opportunities now where we're reforming our team in support of what this is going to look like. We've also had our talent acquisitions teams working with former chief talent officer from Cleveland, who's really getting them set up for what does it look like to do more holistic recruitment. And we also have to do an assessment of what our current special education program is and whether or not it needs to be adapted. So I don't think this is going to be a one solution or one size solution fits anything. I think we're going to, as usual, look at this from a multifaceted lens. I also think that we need to do some very intentional pipeline work. We have a very good, some very good contractual language now where we can incentivize our teachers to go into high need areas. We're going to be starting that up really soon. And we know we have some teachers right now who are in programs getting certifications so that they can move into those positions, and then we can backfill as needed into positions that are not as high need.
Thank you, Mr. DeFavo. My follow-up question to that was, Dr. Chapman, you mentioned the region superintendents essentially monitor those plans, the building level plans. I guess my question is, how often are region superintendents monitoring? Like, is there a sequence to that monitoring? And I guess I want to understand how often are they monitoring the plans once they're created?
So the plans are being monitored on an ongoing basis. So every quarter, the area superintendents are looking at the data, because usually the data is coming in to us. It's being updated every quarter, right? And so They provide the principals with feedback in the development of the plans in the beginning as they're analyzing the data, let's say at the end of the year as they're planning for the new year. And then at the end of each quarter, we're looking at the data as it's coming in. So like, for example, at the beginning of the year, once we complete our beginning of the year assessments for early literacy, we'd be looking at iReady data as a diagnostic assessment to see if we're on track for meeting our goal. Those are some of like the leading indicators that we'll be looking at. So whenever that data comes in, if the school has a goal around attendance, then they would be looking at their attendance data more regularly, more frequently, because that's data that they're receiving on a daily basis. At the end of, weekly, you can look at the attendance and you're charting your progress and working on making improvements. So on an ongoing basis, regularly, and then they're also providing feedback on those school improvement plans. And then remember, our state support team is also monitoring the process and providing the area superintendents as well as the schools with not only feedback on the plans, but also support. So members of our state support team also come in and they're participating in our professional development that we're offering, as well as providing schools with support at the building level. So if a principal says, early literacy, we're having a challenge with, let's say, implementing foundations or phonics, we can ask for support from our curriculum team. We can ask for support from the state support team. Let's, what do we need to do? Let's look at the data. Let's provide some targeted professional development experiences for staff. And so they're helping to brainstorm, provide feedback, but it is an iterative, ongoing process as a part of that continuous improvement cycle. We're not waiting to the end of the year to figure out if we need to intervene or respond to the data. So it's an ongoing process where it's not just one person that's monitoring the plan. It's the responsibility of the BOT to monitor the plan. It's the responsibility of the principal to monitor the plan. It's the responsibility of the area superintendent, our SST, our team. We're all looking at the data. And then, Dr. Brown, if you want to talk a little bit about the new process that we're going to be implementing this year as we look at data throughout the district and invite school teams to come in and share a little bit more about their data.
Yeah, so part of, again, what I think you should have heard sort of time and time again here is alignment. Alignment, alignment, alignment. Alignment of our goals, alignment of our school improvement planning process, alignment of our instructional resources and interventions to support students. And again, we're starting whole system, and as we iterate over time and we learn, then we're going to be able to dig deeper and answer some of these other questions. You guys bring up a lot of very interesting questions that we'll have to dig into as we move along over time. In terms of this year, one of the things that, and again, alignment, as we meet with the school teams, we're ensuring everybody's looking at data the same way. So we got one version of the truth as we're sharing data, so that we're all looking at it the same way. We can have a common conversation. I think that's incredibly important, and the board goals help with it. They help us align and say we're looking at this the same way. The second piece, when we get together, we're trying to turn that school improvement plan into a living document. There's no reason it should be static. So as we're going through the year, we should be revisiting, and there's sort of a balancing act here. From the top, we're trying to align downward and say, these are the resources, these are the goals. We have common goals. Here are the common resources, but we also want bottom up. We want the folks who are closest to students doing a root cause analysis and thinking about what does this mean and what do we need to do at our building in two levels. First, when we're talking about first instruction, we're going to ask every building based on their data, and we've got updated data now because, again, we did this planning process before we had the end-of-year data. We'll also have new data from the start of the year. So let's look at that data and say, okay, based on what we're seeing with our current students and what we learned from last year, at my school, what do I need to do to improve first instruction? And what does professional development look like? Then how do we lean into Dr. Walker's team for that support around professional development? We're also going to ask buildings to begin to think about differentiation as well. So if I'm at a building, what student group has the largest gap? Who's struggling the most at a given building? What are we doing over and above first instruction? What are we doing in addition for that group of kids? And that has to do with, again, aligns, what I'm describing aligns to the MTSS model. It again, is a guardrail from the board. And it's this idea of how do we strengthen, again, that first instruction, and then how do we get really intentional about differentiation of time and resources to meet the needs of students who aren't performing at the same level as the rest of the students at a building. That is the process that we're supporting with our schools as we move forward, and one that we will iterate over time with. And I think, again, the balance there is sort of what I would call a loose coupling. You know, we've got the alignment to goals, we have alignment to resources, but at the same time, we want to offer the opportunity for agency at the building level and insight, because let's be honest, from even with a regional model that gets us closer to buildings, I'm never going to be as close to a building as the teacher in front of the third grade or the principal at that building. And so we need to leverage that wisdom and that knowledge that folks have at a building level to inform as we move forward. It's really trying to allow for both as we move through.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Roman Beckerly.
To Dr. Walker mentioned something. How are we able to staff the co-teaching?
So thank you for that follow-up. So co-teaching, a lot of it is about reorientation. So because we have special education teachers currently in place, some are still teaching in a more resource setting model. We want to have an inclusion model. And so when we're talking about co-teaching, it's not necessarily within the context of needing to hire more staff. It's more about how do we work with teachers and provide professional development around the co-teaching process. And so planning together, working together as both a general education teacher and a special education teacher to maximize the instructional platform for those students. So to Dr. Brown's point, making sure that each student is receiving an optimal first instruction, that guaranteed and viable curriculum. And research shows that even our general regular education students benefit from having that special education teacher in the classroom. And so that is a strategy that we have readily available to us because we have those staff now. It's really more about rethinking, thinking differently, providing professional development about how to redeploy a model that will be more effective to move student outcomes.
I mean, I assume, well, I'm not supposed to comment, so I won't say that. Thank you. Next, how? I noticed, and I appreciate that your presentation observed that Guardrail 1 about MTSS ties to what we're doing. They kind of reinforce each other. I'm thinking that what comes out of this data, the continuous improvement data, and I think at some point, Dr. Chapman, you talked about what will percolate to the top or become more apparent as some buildings are in need of more and some are in need of less. That strikes me as a Guardrail 3. And I guess the question is, how are we looking at Guardrail 3, which talks about aligning resources equitably and making sure that we have strong learning communities? It seems to me, because then I think that comes, how are we using Guardrail 3 to align? And this may be a to be determined, but I just see that connection as well.
I would just add on, certainly Guardrail 3 is a work in progress.
Right.
Just, but certainly this strategy isn't new to us, right? And so when we think about the funding that our schools receive for Title I allocations, those are based on need. When we think about school budgeting process and staffing allocations, that's where we want to go in this under Guardrail 3 of thinking about the schools that need more. How do we allocate resources across the district to ensure that those schools have additional? Right now, we're still operating at a space where we're trying to ensure that everyone has just the basics, right? And so when we talked about, like, this year we're implementing a new instructional coaching model, this was the first step in the direction of ensuring that every school has one coach. Under Guardrail 3, we might get to a place as an organization where we say, this school needs a coach for early literacy, and this school needs a coach for math, and this school needs a coach for science. We're not there yet. Okay. But certainly, we're thinking about what those conversations may look like and how we could allocate resources differently. But it's a part of a more robust process that we'll need to have.
And it also includes Stan. This is that guardrail that he's closely aligned with. So making sure that we go back and look at that budgeting process.
Right.
And informing the board earlier of what those needs are.
All right, thank you.
Dr. Pierce.
How do we know co-teaching will work as a model, a strategy?
Well, we definitely have to evaluate it and just put some metrics in place that we are evaluating the effectiveness of the model. So that's one way that we'll look at. Do we have?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's research that talks about co-teaching when done effectively.
Yep.
So, I think one of the things that we're looking at is making sure that that's why for us as part of the MTSS process, when we're looking at really continuing to deploy that this year, because what we're trying to ensure is that we're not just saying co-teaching, but that we're actually providing professional development around co-teaching. And so because a critical part of that is co-planning, is those teachers thinking together about the lesson before those students are in the room. But as a general strategy, there's a lot of research that supports that as an effective model. But to Dr. Dixon's points, we're going to want to make sure that we're monitoring our implementation of that to ensure that we're being most effective in it.
Thank you for that. Much appreciated.
How do we know that we're going to continue to see an upward trend, and this is not just some anomaly that we're seeing with the data? I know it's hard because it's only one data point, but how do we know that we're going to keep seeing success with an upward trend?
You're asking me to look in a crystal ball.
Super futuristic.
If I'm utterly blunt, I don't think we do know with any certainty. One of the challenges that we have right now, again, we have this massive interruption, so there's no stability to our data. Over time, you get 2 or 3 years in, we're back in in-person instruction, we've got the same curriculum, we're using the same assessments. Ask me that question 3 years from now, predicting out 2 years, and I'll feel a little different than I do right now. With the massive disruption we have, I just don't feel like I can say that with any assurity at all.
With the interim report around second graders that we had,
So we had challenges with our interim reports for growth, kindergarten, first, second.
Right.
And that gives me pause, to be honest. But again, and I think we've had this conversation a couple times with the board, once the data stabilizes here, we'll probably want to revisit goals. We'll probably want to revisit the interims and the thresholds for the interims. Because then we'll have a more stable pattern of data from which to make prediction. The team did the best that we could with very disparate data at the time. And we're coming back out of it. And had you asked me, would I have expected a 10.5 percentage point gain this year, I would have thought that that was incredibly ambitious and not very likely. And yet our team exceeded that this year. And that gives me promise and hope that we're moving in the right direction. But a surety right now, no. We have 2 cohorts of kids who were really very adversely impacted. So the kids who are now in 3rd grade and the kids who are now in 2nd grade, They're going to need additional support to get through this, and we know that that's part of the mix. So I have hesitation about saying, that I have a surety that we're going to continue to see this. I would be shocked at another 10 points. I'll just say that I think is a huge uptick for 1 year.
Are there other questions? All right. Now do we do the voting on this? Okay, so this is a new part. I guess we haven't been doing this before, but we are supposed to vote then to approve.
I think it's accept.
Or accept. Is that someplace do you have?
I move that we accept this monitoring report.
Okay, so there's been a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Could you please call the roll? I'm sorry, is there any discussion about whether to accept it? All right, please call the roll.
Ms. Vera,
Yes.
President Adair,
Yes.
Ms. Beckerly,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Dr. Pierce.
Abstain.
Motion carries.
Okay. All right, so now we are going to do our quick review of how we just did on that session. Sorry, I'm looking to grab my time here for how long we spent. Okay. So board is supposed to do a assessment of how we did. The first category is around preparation. The categories that we can grade ourselves in are effective, approaching effective, effective, and highly effective. Board members, where do you think we were tonight in our preparation?
I think we were effective. There were 3 people, myself, Beckerly, I think I saw Vera. So people did submit questions ahead of time and read the report.
Okay. What about around data and opinions? Were we ineffective, approaching effective, effective, or highly effective?
I would say we're approaching effectiveness. We as a board need to decide if we want to advocate and truly govern in a way that leads to academic success and proficiency for our children as opposed to a process.
Okay. That's your opinion. I disagree with that, but we can discuss it.
And so I'm sharing my opinion, my points during this time of discussion.
Anyone else have thoughts on data and opinions? So
I kind of thought we were effective, partly because you were policing us, but I didn't hear much opinion, or we reframed the question if it came up.
Okay, so somewhere in between those two, maybe?
Yeah.
Board Member Brown.
And with respect to his question, I think that we do need to have the discussion, and we think we talked about it the last meeting, about what we want out of this process and whether the focus is on the process or is on the outcome. And I think that's what I heard.
I hear that. Absolutely. We need to have that discussion, just not in the middle of a monitoring session. Questions and statements.
I was just going to say, I think we were closer to effective on the data and opinions. I feel like everyone, I would give us effective on that.
All right, so maybe closer to effective. Data and statements, ineffective, approaching effective, effective, or highly effective.
I think we're approaching, some people are policed more than others, so some comments go unresponded to, whereas other comments are responded to immediately.
Thank you for that opinion, Dr. Pierce. So you believe that we are in approaching. Any other opinions? All right. Past and future, so we are ineffective. We spent the opposite. Tonight we spent 33 minutes on future and 18 on past. So we did not make it into that, maybe somewhere in between ineffective and approaching effective. Process monitoring and project management. Were we ineffective, approaching effective, effective, or highly effective?
Probably approaching.
Any other thoughts? Lauren Berkeley says approaching.
I think we're still struggling. I think we would be more of in between the ineffective and approaching. Because I think we got a little into the system.
Operation.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe in between. So I do think we graded ourselves down on this one than we have in the past. So we definitely need to consider that and continue to have more conversations about this monitoring process and how we would like it to work. All right. Thank you, board members, for that. Thank you, administration.
Yes, thank you for the report.
All right. Sorry, I'm getting back to our agenda here. Lost my agenda. We are now going to the internal auditor's office. Hello.
Good evening, President Adair, members of the board. It's my pleasure to offer tonight's internal auditor's executive report. The executive report will touch on 3 items. One is a piece of legislation on tonight's agenda. One is a recap of a recent audit and accountability committee meeting. And then one is a recognition of a collaborative effort that the Office of Internal Audit is underway with the talent department. The first item is the board agenda item. That is a resolution to adopt a revised internal audit charter. We annually will review our charter and make revisions to it when necessary in order to keep it aligned with professional standards and practices. We recently presented some revisions at the September 1st ANA meeting, at which that meeting the board suggested and approved adoption of the charter or the revised charter. The Board of Education approved the original charter, so any revisions that we make to that charter also have to come before the board, and they come forth in the resolution that you see today. Most of the revisions were stylistic in nature. However, 2 to point out were added in order to assure the reason for the provisions that were added are really to assure the independence, the organizational independence of the Office of Internal Audit. And what those 2 revisions were, one is to specifically call out in the charter that the board is responsible for the hiring and discharging of the internal auditor, as well as recognizing in the charter that the board is responsible for setting the remuneration for the internal auditor. As I mentioned, the Audit and Accountability Committee did recommend adoption in its meeting. Secondly is a summary of that September 1st Audit and Accountability Committee meeting that took place on the 1st and took place here at 3700. A couple of things that they heard information on as well as discussion on was the monitoring of open items that are reported in external audits and management reviews. That's an ongoing conversation that's taking place among the Audit and Accountability Committee. We also talked about the addressing and closing of items in open OIA issued audit reports. That too is an ongoing conversation. The committee also heard information on the FY 2022 fraud, waste, and abuse reporting activity, and then also a summary of the status of OIA's FY 2023 audit plan and those activities that are part of that plan. During the meeting, they also discussed the OIA's general ledger and financial reporting audit report, as well as the revisions to the charter that I mentioned, and then took official action on both approving the OIA audit report as well as suggesting and recommending the board approve the internal audit charter. Finally, I'd like to just recognize and call attention to a collaborative effort that is currently underway between the Office of Internal Audit and the Talent Department. As you likely recall, a short while ago, the Council of Great City Schools performed a review of our HR function and offered a report that had some opportunities for improvement in it. We'd really just like to call out Mike DeFabo and his team for the collaborative effort that he's shown with the Office of Internal Audit to try to make progress and address those items. And so we're very thankful to Mike and his team for that. Also wanted to point out that the collaborative effort is going to be the subject of a joint presentation performed by, I believe, either Mike or someone on Mike's team and the Office of Internal Audit at the upcoming Council of Great City Schools Fall Conference in October. The internal auditor is very appreciative of Mike's trust in the Office of Internal Audit to provide some assistance and be that collaborative effort or that collaborative resource for him and his team. And we very much appreciate the opportunity to assist. That's the end of my report, and I will be happy to take questions should there be any.
Thank you. Let's turn it over to the co-chairs for any comments first.
That last item is particularly worth noting. We're very excited about that, and we see it as an opportunity to build and grow on that collaboration because it's taking the audit function into the proactive role, and that's exciting.
Are there any questions for the internal auditor's team? Seeing none, thanks for being here tonight.
Certainly, thank you.
And we are not expecting a report from the treasurer's office, but hello, Mr. Roush.
Hello, how are you this evening?
Good. Are there any updates from the treasurer's office?
The only thing I would like to note is just to congratulate the team, the Treasurer's Office team,
yes.
for achieving the Certificate of Excellence from the Government Finance Officers Association for the 22nd consecutive year. So it's a great work team effort that makes that happen. So I know that if Stan were here, he'd want to certainly make sure to call that out this evening.
Yes, thank you. Congratulations to the whole team. 22 years. That's a pretty great run, and we just expect more. So, but thank you to the whole team in the treasurer's office who make that happen every year. Thank you. All right, we're into board matters. Item 8.1, discussion on the State Board of Education resolution to support parents, schools, and districts in rejecting harmful, coercive, and burdensome gender identity policies. Before I turn it over to Board Member Brown, it is our understanding that the State Board of Education, who is actually meeting concurrently to us right now, they might have just finished. They just finished. There was an attempt to, looking at my government affairs, an attempt to actually put the resolution on the floor. No. Okay, so we had someone that wanted to speak about it, one of the board members, but they didn't allow it. But there is a resolution, and we have a copy of it. And I'm going to turn it over to Board Member Brown. We do anticipate them putting it back on the agenda in the October meeting. So I'm going to turn it over to Board Member Brown, who is going to give us a little bit of information about what's going on at the State Board of Education, and then we will have a discussion as the board to decide what it is we would like to do more formally. Board Member Brown.
Thank you. I saw this come up just about a week ago and saw that one of the members of the State Board of Education was planning to offer a resolution basically to support state-sponsored discrimination. That term comes out of a conversation that I had with our local state board member, Antoinette Miranda, who participated in an official statement opposing what was being done. The board member who offered this and who's behind this is named Brendan Shea. This resolution, the Shea resolution, is a response to President Biden and the State Department, the Federal Department of Education, issuing guidelines and issuing proposed rule to change federal interpretation to benefit the LGBTQ community in particular and students that are LGBT to better accommodate their needs. This has been part of culture wars in our country for at least a number of years. The resolution that was offered by Board Member Shea this morning had been out for some time and bothered me a great deal. I thought it was outrageous. The resolution that he offered advocates lawlessness. There's a federal law. He argues that school districts that disagree should not follow the federal law. Importantly, the resolution does not reflect scientific and factual realities. It misstates the scientific realities about gender, sex. It spreads falsehoods about medical care. It spreads falsehoods about transgender people, whether in bathrooms or girls, transgender people playing on a sport that's not their biological match. It even backs up the item that came up some time ago where there might be the horrendous idea of genital examinations to determine whether a student could participate on a sport or not. It misstates the law, legal precedent, for no good reason, and perhaps contrary to the First Amendment, it brings God into the discussion. That was just odd and wrong, and made some very worrisome assumptions about parental control. Today, this morning, when it was offered, there was public comment with at least 50 people appearing and testifying in opposition, and many others present and supporting those testifying in opposition to this. I wanted to be there and told you all that, and I think that the approach that we are hopefully taking tonight will be effective in relaying our opposition, our strenuous, vigorous opposition to this resolution from Brendan Shea. I think we do need to issue a statement immediately with the support of all board members, provided that you all agree that we issue the statement and vote on it. And I don't care whether it's called a statement or a resolution or whatever, as long as it clearly shows our support, or rather our opposition. And then, rather than, this evening, there were further hearings by the State Board of Education. At the later hearing, Board Member Shea introduced a different version of what he had introduced in the morning. I've read the different version with Misty's wonderful help, even got a marked version already. And it's worse than the original. For example, the new one specifically calls for the legislature to pass legislation to prevent any instruction on gender identity, gender orientation, sexual matters, and some other smaller changes that were made just to make it worse. And I believe that we should move forward post haste. There have been a couple of other school districts who've taken some steps. Johanna Lincoln had their board president testify this morning. That's my daughter, Burl, and I'm proud of her for that. There were a few other local school board members from around the area present, but they didn't all testify, and testimony took a long time. It's my intent to return when the board takes this up to act on and to testify at the October meeting of the State Board of Education, and I'd be open to any company that would like to come along. But this is just horrendous, and it's nasty. I can't think of enough foul words to apply, and I think we ought to stand up for our LGBTQ community and for the rest of our school community, because this affects everyone, and oppose what's taking place.
Thank you, Board Member Brown. Other comments?
I just want to say thank you as well for the summary and for being there and for committing to be there and to testify. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Other comments?
I would just add that, Board Member Brown, I appreciate your advocacy on this issue as well as other equity issues that you lean into on behalf of our board. I would like us to put a resolution forward in the hopes that it would also spark or move us to also introduce legislation to the Ohio School Board Association, which is also taking up similar legislation that will impact our students throughout the Central Ohio region. And so I think if our board is going to lead in on this particular piece of legislation on the state board side, that we should also lean in and be advocates and definitely the first to introduce legislation throughout the state level.
I agree.
Board Member Vera, do you have any comments?
No, I just, I thank my colleagues, for constantly being, aware and abreast of what's happening, to advocate for our students and our staff. And as Board Member Brown mentioned, it affects everyone, and so, we are a safe space for our kids, and we want our kids to be able to walk through our buildings and feel supported just for who they are. And so I appreciate the leadership of this board. And certainly we will do what we can to help further protect our students and staff.
Yes, thank you, Board Member Brown, for bringing this to our attention and also being willing to, do testimony for us. This legislation is absolutely disgusting. It promotes just blatant discrimination, and it is just full of hate. and there's really just nothing else to say about it. Here in this district, that's absolutely unacceptable. And this board has continued to fight against this type of legislation, whether it be around issues of race, around CRT, and we will continue to fight because these types of policy that is trying to be pushed through have nothing to do with public education and our mission to educate our students. This type of policy hurts us all and ultimately hurts our democracy. And we need to remember that the people that are making this policy are elected. And it is our job as citizens to ensure that we are informed voters and understand that our voices as voters matter. And so it is extremely important that groups like ours, that other coalitions and groups speak forward and up and really help everyone understand how dramatic the impact of this type of legislation or policy making can have on us as a state, citizenry, and our whole democracy. So board members, I've heard a couple of things that we or you are willing to do. So I want to get some formalized thoughts on our direction. So one thing we can do is issue a statement right away. Typically that is done under the president's signature as the spokesperson. It can be sent out tomorrow. We can also do a resolution that is a more formalized document that can be voted on by the body at the next meeting. We can also have testimony, official testimony, which be written testimony on behalf of the board submitted to the state school board and then can be read on behalf of the board. And then I also heard, which I think is a great idea that wasn't on the list before, is to use our membership in the Ohio State School Board Association and propose statewide amendment to the legislative platform to ensure that this type of legislation is not something that's advocated for on behalf of public policy. So we can do one, some, or all of those things. What is the will of the board in discussion right now on which ones you would like to consider?
All.
Okay. I don't believe anything at this point needs a formal vote because we'll do the, yeah, go ahead.
If we could have all signatures, all board members sign that letter.
And yes, we can now because, well, we might need to vote on that then. Or is it okay because we talked about it in public session?
It will, you talked about it in public session, but certainly if you wanted to have more gravitas, a formal vote would lend it to that, so.
Okay. All right, so then I will make a motion that we take the following course of action. We will issue a letter under the signature of all board members or statement tomorrow. We will then craft a resolution and put that on the agenda for official voting at our next meeting. We will provide testimony as a board in writing and then send a delegate to provide that testimony in person to the state board in October when they consider. And then also work on a resolution for the next board meeting to send to the OSBA to ask them to amend or add to the legislative platform. So that is the motion on the course of action that the board will take on this issue. Is there a second?
Happy to second that motion.
Is there, and thank you.
And
Any
as the
discussion?
documents are written primarily by staff, I'd like an opportunity to participate and comment on the drafting.
And I also would add, President Adair, you know, if our students feel inclined to craft something, you know, giving them an opportunity or staff so I think it's important for us to make this statement, but also I think our kids should be able or have the opportunity to submit something. So if there's a way we can set up an email address for this, just so that we can take that as well.
That's a great idea, as well as any other issue. I think there's still all those CRT things pending and kind of out there as well. So there's a lot of other issues down at the State House and the State Board of Education. So I like that. That's a great idea. I'm not going to add that to the amendment. I think that's something we can just do as an amendment to the to my motion. All right. So there's been a motion and a second. Any other discussion?
Just to be clear, I just want to make sure I know what we're doing here. We have 4 things. We're issuing a statement tomorrow with all board members' signatures, crafting a resolution for the next board meeting, prepare written testimony for the State Board of Education meeting and name a delegate or have a delegate provide said testimony at that meeting, and prepare a resolution for consideration of the next meeting for an amendment to the Ohio State School Boards Association legislative platform.
Yes.
Okay.
Only point of clarification, have we stated that Board Member Brown will be the delegate?
We can.
I feel like I heard us have consensus around that, so can we?
We can formally.
Can we just name that
Fine.
as Board Member Brown?
I would take that as a friendly amendment to my motion that
I accept.
Board Member Brown will serve as the delegate to give testimony.
I would tell you, this, I rarely, if ever, and probably none of you ever see me get angry. Talking about this tonight really has made me angry.
Yeah.
You know, and it takes a lot.
All right. Will you please call the roll?
President Adair,
Yes.
Ms. Beckerly,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Dr. Pierce,
Yes.
Ms. Vera. That motion carries.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Our next, and to board members' point, please, CCS community, flood them, send letters, call them. Remember that they are, they represent us as the citizens of Ohio representing our education system. They are elected or appointed by the governor in some cases, but ultimately they serve you. And so make your voice known to them directly as well. And we'll work on setting up ways that our students and community can also communicate those ideas to us so that we can incorporate. All right, let's go ahead and move into our consent agenda. This evening, our consent agenda consists of items 10.1 to 26.10. Are there any items a member would like to pull off for separate vote tonight? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Motion.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second. Are there any items board members would like to discuss? Dr. Pierce.
Thank you. Item 16.3.
So we have renumbering on 16. So 16, are you looking at
Well, the one
authority to purchase services for upgrading digital control, or are you looking at the quality security system?
The quality
Okay.
security.
That is now 16.2, authority to enter into purchase agreement with quality security system. Go ahead.
So first, I just want to thank our administration for responding to all the questions that we sent in advance related to this issue. I think our community knows how I feel about the wanding that has happened randomly at our games and in our buildings. Wanting or seeking the administration just to provide additional administrative guidelines around how are we selecting the schools that are randomly wanded, the activities, the events, and what's our real strategy to get a handle on safety and security. At the end of the day, I believe it's not just our children, but it's our entire community that is crying out for relationships, that we need to build meaningful relationships with people so we can create safe environments in schools. So in regards to, again, 16.2, I am strongly advocating that our administration continue to work on those administrative guidelines and a real true strategy to get us to safe school environments.
Thank you. Are there other comments on 16.2?
I think, I echo Dr. Pierce's sentiments, and Dr. Dixon and the team, I think, also knows that. And I think we have to be very intentional about communicating, as best as we can. Obviously, we can't say everything because it's a strategy for the protection of our students and staff, but really even understanding, you know, how do we prioritize things from a buildings and grounds level that tie into safety and security. And so I think that is a big part of what, you know, even our teachers want to know, our staff want to know, our community wants to know. They see these things going up and, you know, they want to understand the strategy. And I think that's really something that I think is extremely important, that we're able to just have the conversation as best as we can, as much as we can share, so that it does feel inclusive. It feels like there is a strategy, because I think a big part of what the frustration has been, which I appreciate the team and all of the work that is going behind the scenes, but if nobody knows the playbook, we are kind of in the dark about what's happening and how we can advocate for our students and families. And so, you know, I recognize this is another investment in our safety and security. It's not the be-all. There's more that we've identified that we will need to invest. And so, you know, I look forward to being able to have that conversation and really fully understand what our strategy is.
And can I just add?
Can I go to Board Member Brown first and come back to you? Board Member Brown?
I too concur and want to thank Dr. Pierce for raising that. Back when I served up in the greater Cleveland area in the 80s, throughout the 80s, there were proposals for putting in metal detectors and for otherwise improving safety. I was adamantly opposed to all of those, not wanting schools to be armed camps, not wanting the presence of those kinds of things at all, especially when there had not been any such incident, and to the extent there were incidents, they're rare. To a great extent, I still believe that the serious incidents are rare, but they get an inadvertent amount of attention. I have obviously shifted because I'm willing to support the use of metal detectors or wands, but appropriately in the ways that my colleagues have suggested. But I think we need to do whatever we can to prevent our students from feeling that they are in an armed camp. And you know, yes, we want everybody safe and healthy, but I think we can really work at how we do it in a way that doesn't itself frighten our community and frighten our students.
And that's what I want to add on with. Dr. Dixon, I don't know if you've shown the display that's here in the boardroom for community members to see, but I do think we need to communicate to our families and to our students that these machines will be at some of our buildings and facilities. We need to communicate to our students what their purpose is and to our staff as well. But in this moment, I'm thinking about a young child walking through that and immediately thinking, is this space safe? I mean, because now that's a question. You only see those at certain places. And to have never seen it in one of our schools before, what does that signal to our students and community? So I implore you, as a proud product of our district, I ask that we come up with a real plan to educate our community on the use of these items, and to bring our students in closer in relationships of love and gratitude, as opposed to, what did you call them, the Army? The
armed camp.
Armed camp.
So thank you, board member Dr. Pierce. One of the things that I've said before, that our students come to school, safety is first. And safety becomes for learning.
and we have to ensure that every space is safe for our students. And in recent years, we've had to change our approach and our strategy around what that means for not only our school districts, but school districts across the country. One of the things that President Adair has asked me to do is the opposite meetings of a monitoring meeting that I am updating the board on operational issues. And at the next meeting, we plan to do a full report on security and transportations and some other operational things. So you would see a presentation at the board at the next board meeting. We did have this metal detector here just so board members can see what we plan to purchase. But I agree, the why is needed to make sure that that our students and our staff understands why, and really that the times have changed. It has changed, but we, to your point, we do not want to create spaces where students don't feel safe because of these or in prison or camped. I mean, we've heard all of those terms from others before, fortresses, et cetera. But the plan is to provide the board and the community with more information of why, just as we did when we had to change our approach to athletic events for the safety of our spectators and our students coming to those, and we said why. So to your point, we will do that again to the community. The legislation is to order it, so we have those items on order, but we plan to communicate effectively and clearly to all stakeholders the reasons why.
So it is a balance, right? It's definitely a balance. We had 2 guns in schools today.
Yep.
And that is abnormal. That isn't normal, but we had 2 today.
Right.
And, I know that devices like this make one group feel safe because they know that if they're on and we are using them, maybe those guns today wouldn't have gone through. But the devices like this are not going to solve any problem, right? And I think we have to be mindful of that. It doesn't solve why does our student have a gun?
Right.
Why is it that they feel the need to carry it into school? What is going on at home or in their community? And so these are things that we know we cannot solve by ourselves. This is a community problem. It's a community crisis. We've been talking about this for years, to be quite honest. And we all need to come together and figure out a solution to it. I at some point was like Board Member Brown, like at some point really against these, but I think that there is a balance we must do in this moment in time. And they're portable. They are not permanent fixtures. We do need education on the policy, the rules, what happens. People need to completely understand, visitors, students, staff, what happens when you go in and or knock up, right? So everyone needs to know about it. But at this point, I am supportive of them for the space and time we're in right now, and they are at this moment temporary. Are there other comments or questions, Board Member Beckerly?
Yeah, I echoing everything, and I couldn't agree more with everything everyone said. In my mind, it's a stopgap, but we could also use it as a rallying cry to say to our community, this is where we are right now. We need to do something. So there may be an opportunity there as well.
One quick question. Dr. Dixon, when will these metal detectors actually be, what, are you able to speak to when these actually will be here, or what the timeline is?
Yep, I have one of the team members come.
Okay.
Yep.
excellent point. It will slow entry.
Possibly.
Thank you for saying that. All right, other questions, comments on this? Are there any other pieces of legislation you would like to talk about in the consent agenda? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Dr. Pierce,
With the exception of 13.3, is that our Ohio State contract? Okay.
I'm going to make sure.
Make sure
there's a
for me.
change.
Yes, it is. That's
Yes,
correct.
it is. That is correct.
So with the exception of 13.3, which I'm abstaining, yes for everything else.
Vice President Reyes. Ms. Vera.
Yes.
President Adair
Yes.
and Ms. Beckerly.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, thank you. We have no public comment tonight, and so the next thing on our agenda is to go into executive session. Board Member Vera has that motion this evening.
I move that the Board of Education recess into executive session per section 121.22 Ohio Revised Code to consider the appointment, employment, dismissal, discipline, promotion, demotion, or compensation of a public employee or official, or the investigation of charges or complaints. GI Ohio.
G1.
G1 Ohio Revised Code. Promotion, demotion, or compensation of public employee or official, or the investigation of charges or complaints against a public employee in per section 121.22 G4 to prepare for, conduct, or review negotiations or bargaining sessions with public employees concerning their compensation or other terms and conditions of their employment.
That's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Been a motion and a second. Please call the roll.
Dr. Pierce.
Yes.
Vice President Reyes. Ms. Vera.
Yes.
President Adair.
Yes.
Ms. Beckerly.
Yes.
Mr. Brown.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you. The board will now recess and go into executive session. We will come back out to this room to adjourn our meeting when we are finished. Thank you.